joining. This is the third day of our amazing RevEx Fest, the Revenue Excellence Festival. The weekend is almost here, and we're so pumped for this day, and that's why we decided to start the day with this amazing panel. This summit is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales, sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they they would struggle to answer on their own. And if you're not a member yet, you will be invited to join after the summit. This summit would not be possible without our amazing sponsors who you see in this slide. Thank you to all of them for making RevEx Fest happen. And to learn more about these innovative companies, click on the Sponsored Booth tab at the top of this event page. Also, check the full agenda. You can see the 26 events that we organized. You can see the events that you might have missed and the upcoming ones for the rest of the day. And also familiarize yourself with the platform. Vocast has a lot of functionalities for you to use. Now let's get to our agenda for this event. So I'm going to go through some quick housekeeping notes, and then the speakers are going to introduce themselves. We're going to jump right into the discussion topics. So for today, this session is being recorded. You will be able to access the recording after the panel. And also, please ask a lot of questions to our panelists using the Q&A function. And please, the chat is right open for you to go there and tell us where you're calling us from and ask a lot of questions and participate. But that's enough for now. I'm going to pass it to Mark. He's going to be our moderator for this panel. Mark, you can take it from here, introduce yourself, the panelists, and then just kick off the discussion.
Awesome. Eduardo, thank you so much. Modern Sales Pros, thanks for doing this. My name is Mark Furstein. I'm the CEO of Recapped, and it's the easiest platform for revenue teams to collaborate internally and with their buyers on complex deals and implementations. And today I'm joined by Justin and Chris, also sellers turned founders. I think we're, I don't want to say a unique group, but there's definitely a good amount of us. But really glad to have you guys on here. Maybe Chris, you want to kick off an introduction, and then we'll go to Justin.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. This is one of my favorite topics in terms of talking about founding a company as a sales leader. So I'm Chris Rudigrap. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sendoso. We are a sending platform that helps other companies send out direct mail, gifts, swag, handwritten notes. You name it, we can help you send it out, and we integrate into your tech stack and make it all super easy and seamless. I started the company about 5.5 years ago, and before that, I spent about 10 years in software sales myself.
That's awesome.
Quick introduction on my side. My name is Justin Dignelli. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Pace, which is a software company built for go-to-market teams at product-led companies all around using product usage data to figure out which customer to engage, when and why. I'm really having more data-driven conversations on that front. I started the company about a year ago with my partner. Before that, I spent 6 years at MongoDB, split across sales management, and then a more cross-functional role under the product organization, all about helping the business move from the traditional top-down sales motion to one that featured both self-service and sales. And prior to that was, an individual contributor. So excited to be here.
No, that's great. Thank you, guys. I guess, the first question that's probably going to be on everyone's mind is, how did we get the idea of starting these companies, right? I know for myself, right, I was a VP of sales before this, and whether I was leading the teams or even when I was an account executive myself, something that I always struggled with was losing deals at the finish line, right? We know that this is it's one of probably the most frustrating experiences we can have as a sales rep or as a leader, especially if you forecast it for that quarter, right? And for me, I realized the reason so many of these deals fell apart was really because of lack of alignment and lack of consistency, right? And whether it was the process, could change, or, just we weren't on the same page with all the different stakeholders that are involved, right? And all the different champions and economic buyers and whoever else needs to be involved. And as a VP of sales, I realized that, I had 50 reps, my 5 to 10 of them really were the ones that were kind of driving majority of the revenue, right? So how could I enable the rest of my team to really sell at their best and to really, enable their prospects and their buyers. So for me, that was kind of what started, I needed a tool like Recapped. I needed something. And foolishly, I didn't think that it would be this hard, right? And I think that that's probably something we'll hear across the board. And I was like, oh, 6 months, we'll be good. We'll have millions in revenue. How hard can it be, right? And I think we'll find out the truth is a little bit different. But Chris, how did this journey start for you?
Yeah, so Mark, similar to you, I think some of the best companies are started with pain that you feel yourself, and you feel passionate enough to want to go solve that problem. And so when I was in sales, I found myself being pretty underwhelmed by just kind of spraying and praying with email, and finding that tactic to be really underperforming in terms of yesteryears. So maybe 10 years ago, I felt, hey, I could send out a bunch of emails, get a bunch of replies, but I think I started to see diminishing returns in those replies. I also saw an uptick in all of these kind of email sales engagement tools, making it even easier to do some of the tactics like personalized email. That was becoming even more easy. So all those things, I said, hey, when other salespeople are zigging, I got to zag. And so what can I do to stay different, especially from competitors? And so I started to do more handwritten notes. I started to see a prospect tweet about playing golf and send them some golf balls. And I was taking, kind of count in the back of my head is like, hey, this is taking a lot of effort, a lot of time, but it's working. And so I was like, I wish there was a platform that allowed me to just click a button and send stuff out and integrate it into my sales process. And really, there was nothing out there when I searched the internet and asked sales friends. And so I said, hey, I think this is going to be an even bigger problem in the future. And so I want to start a company to solve this for myself, and then ultimately solve it for hundreds of thousands of others.
Maybe kind of building off that on my own perspective, I always wanted to start a business. My parents had started their own business, not a software business. They owned a dry cleaners, and then, moved that into another business around horses of all things, and equestrian type world. But I felt like, hey, I wanted to start a business, and started my career in sales and had some other ideas that weren't related to what I was doing. And there was a pretty kind of eye-opening moment, which was I was pursuing another idea that was more in like the legal tech space. And I was talking to an investor, and getting pretty harsh feedback of like, hey, this is a pretty sharp idea, but you're not likely to be the person that's going to go found this company. And the lesson I took away from that was, okay, where are my strengths? And also, where do I want to spend 10, 20 years of my life doing? So I always had MongoDB in my prior company. I had the good fortune of working at software as a service businesses, and I always felt like there was a more efficient way to work time. You're optimizing for time, and I really wanted to use data, specifically product usage data, to optimize how I engage with customers at the digital level. And on a macro level, when I moved into a different role at MongoDB, we had millions of users, and this product, how do we actually improve the customer experience by meeting them where they are, and again, using product usage data. So I actually had to move out of sales and into this cross-functional role to broaden my own experiences and even more deeply understand the problem. But I think that really set me up well. But kind of going back to what you all felt, I felt the pain. I was passionate about this, and I really wanted to solve that problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you guys both hit on such a good point, right? That if you're not passionate about what you're working on, like, it's not going to work out, right? Because the journey is so difficult for most people that, it has to be something that you speak to. And I guess a question for you guys, Chris, having been in business, I think the longest out of us three, have you guys gone through some pretty drastic pivots, or how close was the kind of initial idea to, where Sendoso is today?
Yeah, so I would say I wouldn't call it a pivot. I would say an evolution would be an easier way to put it. So when we first got started, the very first kind of MVP was actually called Coffee Sender, and it was ability to send coffee gift cards out. And that was like the easiest, quickest way for us to build something to see, hey, were people willing to send other things than just email and pay money to send gifts as part of the sales process? And that was part of the proof point of, okay, if that's true, what else could we send? And so I'd say we evolved from from that point of the business, from just sending coffee gift cards to sending everything. But that was also probably part of our longer term strategy anyway. So it wasn't like, I think a lot of pivots happen unexpectedly, or you hit a roadblock somewhere and then you need to change course. Ours was more of like a planned evolution, I would say. I would say in terms of our go-to-market motions, there's been evolutions. I think everything has to evolve as you scale. I think one of the bigger ones was originally I thought, hey, we're going to just sell into sales teams and sales teams will buy. And at times it was we got pushed over to the marketing team and realized that was a better ICP for us. We got pushed to the customer success team at times and realized we could sell to them. So we've definitely evolved our go-to-market motion. But from our product perspective, less pivots, more evolution, I think, based on just what our customers need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think, Justin, this is funny timing, right? Because we also started as kind of a top-down company, right? You know, we're creating a new category. It doesn't exist, right? You know, bottoms up kind of didn't make the most sense. Now we're starting to add these like PLG moments where, you know, for companies like where you're able to help out. You know, question for you, like, what skills did you learn during your sales career that you think have been impactful in kind of launching this and launching this company with Pace?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the best salespeople do a few things really well. Like, one, understanding the ideal customer profile, and, you know, like thinking about the right companies. You know, maybe you have a type of product that every single person in the world could use, but even narrowing that down to, you know, ideal customer profile, narrowing it down a little bit more. I think, you know, as a startup, especially a seed stage firm, you know, you really want to make sure you're spending time in the right place. That's one. Number two, just around discovery, right? Thinking about asking open-ended questions, digging for pain, really understanding the dynamics of who's feeling this pain, who owns it, and who's responsible. So I think a big part of our journey as an early stage company is narrowing in on that. And kind of like Chris mentioned, you kind of go in with an idea of like this big picture, this future you want to build for, and people kind of agree there, but you sort of go through these twists and turns and realize, hey, like it actually may be another function in the organization that's feeling that pain and wants to own that. Or maybe you need to sort of pivot your message into smaller bite-sized approaches where people can start there and sort of then eventually see the big picture vision. So I think it goes back to a lot of the fundamentals that make salespeople effective, good salespeople.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I don't know how you know, I have friends that were technical founders, right? And they're launching this company and, you know, they don't know anything about sales or like, and you're like, I'm helping advise. And, you know, it makes me realize like how blessed we are to have that kind of skill set, right? We can run discovery questions. We can figure out, we can dig deep. We can also sell, right? And I think that's like the core foundation of the business, right? So, you know, solving the problems for our users.
The other thing I would say there too, Mark, is that aside from just selling customers, selling prospects in the early days, I think my sales background has also led me to help selling candidates. And I think recruiting is a super crucial part of, you know, every business. And, you know, it translates really well when you have to sell the vision of your company versus, you know, in sales, maybe the vision of your product. So I think, you know, that's another really important part of starting a company. And then, you know, the obvious other one is if you need to go after fundraising, being great at sales is also another great, you know, asset to have, in that you can go into a fundraising effort and leverage your sales background to be, you know, good at that too.
Yeah, it's oh, sorry, go ahead, Justin.
I was just gonna kind of highlight, like, there on the flip side, those skills are super valuable. I think there are certain things for sure that I maybe had to unlearn, especially from a product discovery standpoint, right? Like, not always selling and leading the witness and sort of driving people towards your desired outcomes. I think sometimes, you know, kind of learning around how to do more open-ended discovery and research and separating really the two, right? And that there's a time and place for both, but, you know, it is a subtle twist on, you know, how you engage with the customer when you're doing more product research as well. I don't know if you all went through something similar, but for sure it was something I had to kind of learn how to do both and when and where to do each.
Yeah, I mean,
well, it's funny.
Sorry. Go on, Mark.
Chris. I mean, I don't remember what book it was, but I remember reading back when I first started my sales career, like sales is life, right? Everything is sales, right? Whether you're at a hotel checking in or, or trying to upgrade a flight, like those skills can be used everywhere, right? I think it's so commonplace to be able to take that and tailor it, right? Chris, I mean, you're absolutely right. Selling a candidate on the vision, the really irrational decision, right, to leave their comfortable job and join a startup that's high risk, potentially high reward, like it is something that founders have to learn, right? Because when you look at it on paper, it almost always doesn't make sense for someone to join a company as a second, third, 10th, 15th employee. Yet people do, because it's the why behind the scenes, right? It's the vision, it's the mission, it's something bigger than the company.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add to that too is that I think as a salesperson, there's a couple soft skills that I'd say lend itself to other parts of the business, like Justin was saying. So one is, I think as a salesperson, you have to have some sort of confidence that you're going to close this deal, help this prospect, solve their problems. And I think that level of confidence also translates in saying, hey, I'm going to be confident in being a product manager, or I'm going to be confident in being our first customer success manager. I'm going to be confident in doing our taxes. And I think as a founder, you end up wearing a lot of hats. And as a salesperson, you come in with a bit more confidence because of, just the day-to-day nature of sales, and that you have to be confident in selling your product. And then, for me, I was, working mostly in early stage startups and sales too. So there was always ambiguity. And so that kind of ambiguity of being in early stage startups, lended itself well to them becoming a founder and having a lot of ambiguity in my day-to-day too.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, so question for you guys. So we talked about, taking your sales skills and applying it to founders. As we were talking through this, something that came to mind is, what skills or things have you guys learned as founders that you actually have made you better as sellers?
I think my depth of product knowledge as the founder, and being kind of like as the founder and like leading the product direction, and then being able to instantly affect product direction has helped. I think as a lot of salespeople, especially as the company gets larger and larger, you might have product ideas, but then your ability to take that over to your product manager or leaders and say, hey, change this, is sometimes like you don't have as much weight to push if there's 50 salespeople and you're just one of 50 at that point. But as the founder, I was very happy to be able to, learn more about what the product needs are for our customers as it evolves, and then quickly take that into our product roadmap.
Yeah, I would echo that. As an early stage founder, you're kind of doing most of the selling. You're having a multitude of sales calls, and a big part of your job is not just to close the deal. Really, it's actually a much smaller part, especially earlier days. You're really trying to get concrete feedback. So yes, you're doing the selling, but you're trying to pattern match. You're trying to turn that information into actionable information for the product and engineering team, and sort of bring signal through all that noise. So I think that's a big part of that. I think the other part as well is, questions. I mean, you're doing that whether you're a founder, whether you're a seller, but asking the tough questions, cutting through the noise. But again, like I think just playing the long game. If you're early stage founder, it's less about crushing your numbers. I mean, it's always important, but it's really about building the right product. So I think just being very mindful for what you're signing up, because it's you really can't throw a deal over the fence. You founded the company. You have to own it. You have to be this yes person. So that much more thoughtfulness goes into, how you think about which customers to bring on. I think it's like a big part of what we think about. Just because they want to be a customer, should they be? Can you make them successful? How does this make the company better? Maybe that's at least from our side.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one of my advisors gave us a quote early on that always kind of stuck with me, right? We're not paid to win every inning. We're paid to win the game, right? And so, whether it's a deal here or, a partnership or something, right? It's the 5-year, it's the 10-year journey that really matters, right? And I think, it's funny for me. I mean, I echo everything you guys said, but for me, like while selling helped with fundraising, actually, the better I got at fundraising, the better I was able to take that, crafting of the vision and the clarity of that vision and like what our mission is as a company, and take it back to the rest of the sales team. And that, that's translated now into, our calls and our deals and our demos. And, like now, like we have, I feel like, a very good understanding of who our customers are. And if they don't share the same beliefs as us, they're not going to be a great fit, right? Because the product, it's just one piece of it. You can't just plug and play something and, have it be successful. You need the enablement behind it. You need the belief behind it, or at least in our case. So
yeah, I think the other interesting thing there, Mark, is almost like the opposite of what did I have to unlearn in sales to be an effective founder. And it got me thinking too, just now, that like, in sales, you've got a quota and you're willing to, you want to close every single deal you can. You're not going to like pass on deals as a sales rep because that's your livelihood. But as a founder, I think there's actually bad customers in the early days, or customers that are going to lead you down the wrong path of, trying to ask for all these features that might not be the right ones for your company. And so I think you have to remove your sales hat of like, let's close every single customer we can and let's keep every customer we can, which generally is the right direction. But I think there's certain times where in the very early days, you don't want to, go down the wrong path. And, it's okay to say no to a customer or to lose a customer, perhaps, if it's going to be bigger for the company. So
100% echo that statement for sure. I think picking the right, and then going back to the ideal customer profile a little bit, it's not always how much money can they spend, it's the complexity of the organization. It could be the complexity of an integration. Are they, going to be the reference that when you go out to think about raising money and, eventually the investors are likely to do blind references and things like that. Are they folks that have any sort of weight with the investment community? Some of the things that you about.
Yeah, no, 100% right. Because, a lot of founders that I talk to, they're always so gung ho about, if I can only land this enterprise IBM type client, right? Well, actually, that might be a really, really bad thing for your business, because that feature set and those feature requests are going to determine the next 2 years of your roadmap, right? And what if that's not the direction you're ready to go in, or don't even want to go in, right? And so Chris, and I mean, Justin, you guys are so right on. Picking who you do business with is just as important as who you don't do business with, right? What do you guys, I guess, jumping ship a little bit, what do you think have been the biggest challenges or maybe surprises of designing a product for the sales ecosystem, right? Designing products for yourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think a couple of things come to mind. One, I think for us specifically, we thought we were going to sell into sales, and sales had big budgets because they closed big deals, but we ended up finding a lot more budget in marketing. And so that was a learning for us, again, going back to, designing a product for a user, but the buyer that had budget was slightly different. So we had to appeal to both sales and marketing in a lot of cases. And so that was a learning. I think another one is just going down to the sales rep or account executive or SDR level. I think those types of folks will turn over from time to time, maybe more frequently than other roles. So you onboard somebody, and then a couple quarters later they're on to their next sales role, and so there's a lot of continuous onboarding, which could also be beneficial though. So if you drive a strong community and you build these sales reps as champions, they go and bring you into the next company, which could be equally as great. But you're also just having to make sure you're constantly enabling and training users as they continue to get onto the platform. And the last thing I think is just certain reps have a hard time with change management, and there's you hit quota last quarter, and now there's a new tool, but why do you even need to learn it if you think you can just do it again without it? And I think some sellers are, in their own mind saying, hey, I don't need anything new. I can just do what I did. But then there's also the other sellers out there that are looking for the new tools that can make them 10 times better. And so you've got to know how to talk to both of those audiences.
Yeah. The last point you made, Chris, is one that stands out to me. I think if you've been in sales and sales management, there's to your point. Every quarter there's a new tool that sort of promises some magic bullet, which most of us are pretty skeptical to. So I think if you're building tools, whether they're purchased by a sales team or they're more likely to be used, I think that's more common than not. We're probably in that bucket too. You really, I think I'm mindful of one, fitting into their existing workflows. If you don't, there's a subset of folks that are not likely to adopt it. The second piece is if it's a product that is sharing data, trust is important. Right? So helping them understand where data came from, what's working. I think if you lose that trust, then you're not likely to, have much success. Some of the things.
Yeah, no, 100% echoing just everything I've heard, right? And I think, for us, some findings. So obviously, we are mostly primarily used by the account executives, right? So I think we feel this more than most. But a couple of things that Justin, to your point, is sales tech is crowded. There's a million tools. In every category, there's 5 or 6. They're all promising something different. And, the average rep is jumping between a dozen different tools on a given day, right? On the low end, right? Some people are doing, 25 tools, which is crazy. But, I think the double-edged sword there, that is that you have to really cut through the noise, and like being 1 or 2x better isn't enough. You have to be 10x better. You have to be 20x better. But if you can be, then the good news is that when you sell to salespeople, they're naturally very good sellers, right? So they're going to go and they're going to tell their friends about it. They're going to post about it. So it becomes this kind of like, really high, I guess, ladder to climb, right? But if you can do it, it becomes a really great benefit to a business. No, I love that. I think, Justin, I guess that's a really good point about data, right? As startups, how have you guys found a way to build that trust as an early stage company, right? You don't have the name brand of these larger, bigger companies. Chris, maybe in our early days as well. But like, how did you guys convey that trust and show that, hey, we can be great custodians of your data and deliver value?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that question. The first is, as an early stage company, and probably speaks to employees and early stage customers, you're likely to work from your network. And I think the benefit of working at MongoDB previously, no on, and that's helped, building a strong reputation. Well, before you become a founder, I think as best as you can, that's going to help you leverage your network building. But I think that goes away when you put the tool in front of an individual contributor that may never have heard of MongoDB or our company. And really, they're just saying, how does this help me do my job? So really quickly need to make it, human readable, friendly, almost, as consumer friendly as it could be. Something where, hey, really quickly, I get value from this. Help me do my job better. Yeah, I want to come back more. So just trying to make it as straightforward as possible. I think that is really key.
Yeah, for me, I'd say there's a couple of things that stand out from the other days. One was, we built a lot of integrations in the early days with Salesforce and Marketo and HubSpot and Outreach and SalesLoft. And so we were able to put our logo next to their logo, and it built some credibility for us. And so they're like, oh yeah, I recognize HubSpot. Like, oh, you integrate? Cool. Like there's a sense of like comparative logos provide more trust. The other thing we did early on is we actually really invested in security and was upfront in our sales process instead of being reactive and being more proactive. In the early days, investing in things like SOC 2 or having recent pen tests that sales reps could share very quickly instead of scrambling when they get asked that question. And so I think for us, it's really being proactive, preparing for those types of security related questions, and then enabling reps to feel confident that they can answer them instead of having to kind of on the spot figure out an answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, the security thing is so vital, right? We just got our SOC 2 compliance like a month ago, and I could tell it's like 1,000 pounds have just been lifted off our shoulders, right? Because now other customers were like, "Hey, we jumped through the hoops, right? We dealt with the BS, right? Like this is now we're trusted, and thankfully we've been trusted to that point. But no, and I think also the point that came to mind for me too is, that trust is earned from the first call and the first interaction, right? So how you sell is, I think, just as important as what you're selling, right? And having that experience that the buyer goes through, that can either kill the trust or gain it, right? So, for any sellers that are thinking, like, every interaction really matters, in my opinion. What advice would you guys give for sales leaders or reps thinking of starting their own company?
Biggest thing I would say is go do it now. I think it's I'm a big believer in, like, you miss every shot you don't take, and so if you're thinking about it, go do it. If you're not thinking about it and you have no idea and you have no pain you're trying to solve, well, obviously don't do it. Don't just like go start a company. But I'd say, like, continue to look out for these big pain points, and remember it's going to be a 10-year plus journey, and so make sure you're passionate about solving that pain. But I think it's worth three testaments that it's no longer like you have to be an engineering leader to start a company. There's a myriad of examples of sales leaders starting companies and being very successful now.
Yeah, I think, because I get this question from time to time, I think there's probably a set of questions you'd want to ask yourself right before hey, I think a lot of people are excited about starting a company, but what comes with that is probably not as much money as you make in sales, and being kind of comfortable with what that means for your lifestyle. Number two, sort of what are the other folks you might need to surround yourself with to make you successful. And really the first thing is like this idea and the business problem that you want to work on, doing the upfront diligence to make sure people, it could be a potentially big business, it could be a venture-backed business, and it's something you want to spend 10 years on, right? You really should think about it from that time frame. And if not, that's okay. It may make sense to go work at an earlier stage company. Those are, I think, the qualification questions you probably want to ask yourself. And like Chris said, if you kind of check the box on all of them, there's always going to be a reason why you shouldn't do it, but you should start, assuming all those boxes are checked.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, starting one just to start one, terrible idea. Don't do it, right? You will make way more money. You'll be able to sleep at night. You'll have less stress, right? Like, continue doing what you're doing. But if, on the flip side, you can only see yourself being the one that solves this problem, or, if money didn't matter and you were focused on that, then 100%, start it. And it doesn't have to be kind of an all or nothing, right? Because I have some friends, they're working on things on the side right now. And until it gets to a certain point, they're still continuing their sales career, right? Or they're doing their main kind of hustle throughout the day. So you can start small, you can experiment. Justin, looks like you were going to say something.
Yeah. Well, I think kind of, Chris, you highlighted it, right? I think there are opportunities to sort of test the idea and sort of make it, this minimal viable product. You hear a lot, but that could be a slide deck. That could be a phone call with a handful of customers. I think the early days, a lot of it is looking for signal of both the pain, the market, the willingness to pay, and starting there. And even that might even be consulting. That might be something small that you do, but starting there and building a foundation, what you're going to do, like that will make it so much easier to get started. It's, you don't have to build $1 billion business day one, or even you may have a plan to get there, but that's likely going to have twists and turns. And most investors are really mindful of that, but getting started and testing things, kind of start small.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at least for us, most of the plans that we had day one didn't plan out, right? And I mean, very few of the things we initially thought were going to work actually worked, or in that capacity, right? So, get it out there, test, experiment, right? It really comes back to that feedback loop. How quick can you make that feedback loop? If it takes you a year to get results, it's probably not going to be a good time. But if you can get those same results in a couple of days with 80% accuracy, then you're really rolling.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, I think for us too, something that really helped me, that someone gave me as advice early in the days, as you're going through and as you're working with people and you're, in your sales career, create a list of your MVP, right? Your dream team. Oh, right. Hey, Chris is fantastic at customer support. If I have a company, I'm going to bring him in, right? Or, Rebecca is fantastic at marketing. Let me grab her when we go in and, launch this, right? So for me, I literally kept a list of every, amazing person that I worked with. And as soon as we started the company, as soon as we can start affording some of them, those were the first people that I reached out to.
Yeah, I love that. I think on that same topic is advisors too, where maybe you don't want to go hire your past CEO or some VP right away, but you can make them as advisors. And having a list of like a short list of your advisors that you want to go after is also a good way to surround yourself with people that can increase your chances of success.
So let's turn a little bit. What are some of the biggest lessons that you guys learned that maybe didn't work out, right? Or that maybe were painful at the time to go through?
Chris, do you want to start?
I'm trying to think of some of the biggest lessons.
I have one, and that's what Chris is a comment you mentioned. I think a big lesson for us is that everything takes 2 or 3 times longer than you think it will. Right? Every product feature, every hire, every announcement, every fundraise, every deal, just everything took so much longer than expected. Right? So that's something now that we've kind of baked in and we've learned from. But in the early days, we underestimated, overpromised left and right. And for me, that was a really, really big lesson. But what about you guys? I'm sure we could talk about this for an hour at least. Right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the more tactical takeaways that someone could take right now. One of them is lessons in pricing. I think pricing is so important in how you price your product. And so that there was some lessons learned that we changed our pricing after about 6 months, which was great. And then that was about a big pricing increase in how we thought about what we would gate and what we didn't gate. We then gave our pricing a couple years to be in the market, and then changed it again, and we're looking at doing another evolution of that. So I think lesson learned there is make sure you really nail pricing and or learn and evolve pricing. That's one lesson that comes to mind. I think there's a lesson with knowing when to fire people too. I think people, you're building a people organization at its core, and at times in the very early days, I was consulting another co-founder recently and, was talking about just this person that wasn't working out, and they were going to give them another couple months to see, and they just weren't showing up and weren't hustling. And, it's kind of like, you got to know when to cut bait. And I think that's an important lesson where, you're not in the business of being best friends with your employees all the time. And if it might be make or break in the early days to know when to cut a bad person and bring on someone else to replace them. I think that's a harder lesson too.
Yeah, I think couple thoughts that sort of stand out for me. I think, again, kind of keeping it simple around what can you achieve sort of right in that moment, sort of what do we want to do this week, and get excited about it. It's going to take time, but focusing the group there. Keeping sort of as an early stage company, yes, you want to think 1, 2, 3 years out, but probably extending that out to what can you accomplish in the next 90 days. And it never quite feels like you do as much as you want, but I find reflecting back and asking yourself, or thinking about where you were, say 90 days ago, you're like, wow, we've actually made a lot of progress. And it's important, I think, to share that with the team as well. So I think that's just the cadence of doing that and helping people see the progress that's taking place. I think going back to Chris's point, if you've worked at a later stage company, you can bring folks in that may be used to a lot of structure and process, and you may sort of forget that you're okay with the zigging and zagging, which is part of startup building, but that's not always a fit for everybody. So really just thinking through what's the right fit. They may have been amazing at the company that you worked at that went public, but if they don't have startup experience, which people will say, and that means a lot of things, but a lot of times what it means is ambiguity and twists and turns. And are you okay with that? And working through that process and having faith that you'll get there. I think that's another big lesson. I mean, maybe the other one around, or go ahead, Chris, and I'll add
I
one
was just
more.
going to say, go on, finish up your thought.
I was just going to say the fundraising piece too. First-time founder, you just people say run a process, and what that means and how to run a good process. That evolves as well. So would love to maybe get your take there too for folks that are thinking about starting a company and like how to do that effectively. Twists and turns on that.
Yeah, real quick before the fundraising talk, I say one of the lessons really that I learned and worked out is I think as a sales founder, you aren't going to go code the application yourself. So you need someone to be on the engineering side. And when I was starting the company originally, I was like, I need to find a technical co-founder and go hire some technical engineers day zero, or that's not going to work. And then I really learned from someone else. It's like, hey, there's some great engineering agencies out there that can, offset that in the early days. And so we actually got started through an external agency first, and that really allowed me to, quickly start to get a product being built. And then eventually we hired a CTO and more people, but we were able to bring a product to market without having to really delay to find that perfect co-founder engineer or that perfect, head of engineering founder day one. So I think that was a good lesson that you can build a company with an agency team and then drive traction or get a product to a point where then you can attract an engineering leader in even easier then.
Which goes back to the point earlier, right? Small steps. You don't have to go all for nothing, right? It's take these small incremental improvements. No, I love that. I had no idea that you guys started out with an agency initially. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think because I had a chance to think of some while you guys were talking, but one thing that for me I kind of refined over the past couple of years is really just trusting my gut, right? Like if you mentioned earlier, like I got flashbacks to employees that like we had these same conversations, right? You're like, oh, they haven't worked out for 6 months, but something tells me this is going to be the turning point, right? And it's like what the past performance is going to be a very strong indicative reflection of the future, right? So like if they haven't done it, trust your gut and go with it, right? And if you're picking up on signs, like at this point, like if something for me just feels off, I immediately stop what I'm doing and I investigate that, right? I dive deep. What's going on? Why am I thinking this way? Is it logical? Is it not? And then more often than not, it's the solution that we probably should have done, but we're trying to be too nice or trying to figure out, and hope is not a strategy, I think. And I think the other thing too is, yeah, I mean, on the fun, let's pivot actually to the fundraising side, as we're mindful of times. Chris, what have been some of the biggest lessons that you've learned on the fundraising side?
Yeah, so we've raised friends and family, then seed, then A, then B, then C. So I've been kind of out there fundraising for probably every year for 5 years. And I think in the early days, being a sales leader, that, you can take a no and it's not personal. So I think that's, kind of an obvious lesson is that who cares if you get a bunch of no's. For me, one of the things that we learned that was strategic is when we were going to go out there and, we got a good amount of inbounds every time we wanted to do a fundraising process. For me, it was more like, well, what can I get out of them too? So we would ask some of these VCs, hey, like, can you introduce us to a portfolio company as part of this process? And so we actually used it as like a lead gen for us as well, to try to get some extra value out of the time I'm spending, given that I know that like 30 out of the 35 conversations are going to get no's. Well, at least maybe what that no can still lead to a prospect or a customer. So I think that that was useful. The other thing is that you should really, you'll get a lot of inbounds and you're going to like feel like, oh, wow, this investor wants to talk to me, like stop everything. And the learning there was a couple things. One is it the right person at the firm? Because you might be even talking to junior person or not the right person. And so making sure you're talking to the right person at the firm, but then also making sure you want to kick off the fundraising process in its entirety and making sure all VCs are at the same point at the same time when it comes to term sheets. And I think we learned that like kind of the hard way in our Series A, where we like kind of had a few front runners that jumped the gun, and then we had other people and we're like, "Yeah, you're kind of late. We already are past due diligence, and so." The best thing to do is kind of give the high level teaser and then try to say, hey, we're going to start this fundraising process, in X month, and then we'll open the data room for X days, and really try to create a process versus just being excited about an inbound investor interest.
Yeah. I think kind of highlighting that, in an ideal situation, you have all the investors kind of lined up in a row. Whereas, if you start all these ad hoc conversations, you're basically, it's almost like a sales cycle, right? You have some that are late stage, some that are early stage. You really just want, but you only want to do one. So I think that's a piece there. And the other one is, like, are you ready, right? Like, have you kind of practiced? Have you worked through maybe friends and advisors, other founders that have maybe gone through the process? And does it feel right? Do you kind of have a sense of the questions that you're going to be asked, or the sense how you might think about answering them, and kind of just sequencing them around the types of investors you talk to? Maybe you start with some that are maybe not your on your top of your list, but practicing there a little bit. Maybe they are. Maybe by the end of the conversation, you realize that they actually could be really good. Not that you're wasting anyone's time, but I think there's a game plan and a strategy there. So, but the key piece for us was find people that are passionate about what you're doing. They probably already made up their mind that they want to make an investment in the space that you're in. Usually, my experience. Are you the right person? Someone that has your back? Like, what are they bringing to the table for you, or what do you do for them? Because it's really more than just money, right? So,
yeah, no, I love what you said about kind of picking the process, right? Because just like in sales, right, you're not going to go after your dream top 5 client as your first client, right? You need to refine the pitch. You need to roll out some features. You need to start maybe not at the bottom, but you need the less popular, right? And then you go from kind of that tier to a higher tier, all the way up to your dream customers, right? And I think for me, the 2 biggest takeaways that I've had, because we did our seed, we did a friends and family, and then we did a seed, and that we've actually about to announce a seed extension, and we'll be gearing up for an A. But the 2 things that kind of always stuck out with me, one is at the end of the day, they're really investing in the people, right? Now, when you get to be later down the road in the B's, the C's, and D's, right? Like, Chris, I'm sure that now it's very much a numbers crunch, right? What is the growth model? What is this, right? Like, but in the early days, it's so much, are you the right person? Are you going to be working on this? And do the investors like you for you? That if you were going to scrap this business and go for something completely different, right? You're going to change into an e-commerce, I don't know, sweatshirts for puppies business, right? Versus, selling to salespeople, will they still support you? And almost always, like, the answer should be yes, right? And that's why they're investing. But I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways too is really the importance of story, right? And it really took us until kind of our seed for me to really start learning this, but the narrative and the story of the vision that you're saying in the future has to be so enticing, right? It's not just, oh, here's a collection of really beautiful slides. It's here's what we believe. Here's why it's fundamentally different. Here's how we're going to get there. And it's really that narrative that becomes so important for me.
I'd go back to Justin's point too, just on the when, and that, are you ready for it? Do you, can you grow by way of, if you're a sales leader starting a company, can you just start selling and driving customer revenue that then you can put back into the business to add more people and grow the company a little bit more from revenue day one, and get some more traction to a point where you can get either a better valuation, or, maybe you're a founder that wants to, your goal isn't to build $1 billion company and go IPO. Maybe you're just would be happy with exiting for 10 million. And, you got to realize that if you get on the hamster wheel of raising money, once you raise the seed, then you're going to really be enticed to the A and then the B. And then so, you might be better off just saying, hey, I'm going to build with customer revenue and maybe some savings to get to, a couple million in ARR and then exit the business without ever having to take funding ever. So there is a world where bootstrapping or, there's interesting new vehicles like companies that will allow you to leverage your ARR to finance, and drive some funding through more of like a debt vehicle. So there is interesting choices, and you've got to really know, is VC the right choice or is other vehicles better?
And I think there too, it's like, okay, you leave today's session and you're like, great, I want to start a business. I don't think the order of operations is to go build a VC pitch deck, right? Like I kind of go back to what you said, like some small version, whether it's you're doing research or you're building some minimal viable product, which doesn't even mean that you need to build an actual piece of software. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be sort of a mock-up. It could be anything, right? And just sort of getting people leaning in and be like, I would pay for that. And there's ways to go fund that and build that. So I think that's likely, what the next step is. It's not crunching a business model. Those things I think probably come after, proving you have a real piece of a business to build there.
No, I think you guys hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, if I could give one piece of feedback, one takeaway for this, the best way to raise money is to not need it, right? So if you can bootstrap and build a great business without ever needing it, you're going to get that capital, right? Or you have a better chance. Being mindful of time. Let's change into, I think, probably some of our favorite topics, the sales tool landscape, right? So a lot of things have shifted in the past couple of months, right? Especially, right? Budgets are getting tighter. Companies are doing layoffs. Economic downturn, potential recession. Like these are all impacts. What are your guys' beliefs of the future of the landscape of sales tech or revenue tech? How do you see it shifting? What are you excited about? Are there new trends that you think will start to occur?
Yeah, I'll chime in with a few thoughts on that. So I think I'm very bullish on the future of sales tech, rev tech. I think there's still a lot of room for growth and making salespeople of the future more efficient and better sellers. I think there's still a lot of room left for growth there. I do think that there'll be more consolidation and more kind of sales tech wars, maybe, where existing companies will add a feature that kind of overlaps on another company, and so there'll be a more people entering the space, meaning more competition. But I think in a lot of cases, competition and kind of the quote of rising tides raises all ship will actually help, because there's just more awareness that this type of tool, this type of software can actually be helpful. So I'm hopeful that this spawns years and years to come, decades to come of more enablement, more stronger revenue operations teams that leverage sales tech as their competitive advantage.
Yeah, I think the word efficiency is one that stands out to me. And, based on my experiences at MongoDB, I definitely saw a shift in buyer behavior and the sort of explosion of product-led growth and self-serve products, which I think really nicely maps to the way new age buyers want to engage with software vendors. But what I think that means is you have an explosion of the number of users and customers, which is amazing, and there's an explosion of vendors. I think what that means is you're going to have salespeople, potentially less salespeople, but they're asked to do more. They're asked to cover, or maybe it's the same amount of salespeople, but they're asked to cover more accounts and have higher quality conversations, even though there's an abundance of things that are happening. So I think that's really going to be a big play. How can these companies be more efficient versus just throwing people at the problem? There's probably nothing that bums me out more when you see these huge layoffs of salespeople, where I always ask myself, why were they hired in the first place? Could we not have used data maybe to be a bit more efficient there? And I think as an individual seller, when you've been able to leverage that type of data to have a data-driven conversation, crush your quota, it's just like a superpower. So I think that's just going to be a big part of how do we make folks work smarter and hard for sure, but smarter and smarter.
Yeah, no, I love what you guys said, right? And I think when you kind of like zoom out and you think about it, right? Because I spent a lot of time obviously thinking about this, but in the 2000s we had the birth of the CRM, right? It was kind of like the first birth of sales tech, right? Salesforce, everything else. And then really over the last kind of decade, you've had, the emergence of this new wave of, sales enablement, right? Sales engagement platforms, right? Platforms like Sendoso, everything focusing on making the seller more efficient. And I think what we're going to actually start seeing, and you guys both hit on this, is the next wave is buyer enablement, right? That's the future, right? How do you do more with less by enabling your reps to be more productive, by giving them a framework, a blueprint, and more effectively just reducing friction, right? I think getting out of the way and letting the customer be more selective and effective, right? Like Justin, you're seeing this with the PLG model. the bottoms up, right? Like it's all about just removing friction and enabling your buyer, right? And I think so the companies that are going to be able to leverage that and really tap into how they sell, I think will be the ones that are going to be really, really effective going forward. And it really does become a differentiator because there's so much competition. There's so many similar feature sets. It's really that X factor that happens throughout.
Yeah, and I think if I was a sales rep or a sales leader, I would, want to get very knowledgeable about what all that sales tech is. How do I be the best at it? Because I think, when I was in sales, I was like, I'm good at using Salesforce, that, a decade ago, and like that was a competitive advantage for me, kind of, because I was like awesome at that.
Yeah.
I think for future generations of sellers, it's like, what sales tech are you good at? How do you get better at it? How do you use that as your competitive advantage? Especially in a competitive commoditized model where maybe your competitor isn't using the same sales tech that you have. And so how do you make sure that you are adapting to change instead of, resisting it?
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about kind of like the evolution of what the sales tech stack is today, right? There's a bunch of must-haves. But if you look backwards 5 years, those were probably nice to haves, right? So what are going to be the future must-haves that are going to give you a couple of years of advantage until it's just something that we bring to the table, right? I guess let's, wrapping up, making this something very, very tactical. What is one piece of advice that you guys could give to sellers and sales leaders, whether it's skill, a tool, or a way of thinking? What would you guys go with? And Justin, let's go in reverse order. We'll kick off with you.
Yeah, I think if you are serious about it, I think finding potentially a partner that is a good fit to really, if you're going to build a piece of software, and that's one. I know you said just one, but the other part is if you're at a software company, leaning in and getting more involved in some other parts of the organization. Maybe it's the product organization, maybe it's the engineering. Like, how can you play a critical role in improving how the product works and really learning from that experience and potentially leveraging it for your next venture?
I'll take this question in two different ways. One is just like, if you're a sales leader listening to this and you're just excited about sales tech, I would say first is and foremost is how do you make sure you build enablement and operations around the software and not just like lob it over the fence and hope people use it. So I think you really is equally as focused as driving usage and adoption of the tools as it is just buying the tool in the first place. So I'd say that's my advice from more of a tactical sales tech perspective. As a sales leader thinking about starting a company, I really go back to, what's the worst that could happen if you go try something and then, you're probably overemployable anyway. You could go back in a year and get another job as a sales leader. And so what's the worst that could happen? A year of, burning some cash. But, the opposite of that could be, a decade of happiness and fulfillment and wealth and everything else that comes with starting a company. And so, risk reward, I'd say go do it and start a company if you're listening to this and haven't yet, or if you are still not there yet and you want to do it in 6 months, I totally agree with Justin. Try to start learning more you can. What is the product doing? What can I learn about customer success? And just soak up knowledge and, map out the org chart and who's doing what and this and that, and just try to, soak up as much knowledge as you can at your current organization.
No, I love that. Right. I think start small, be something you're passionate about, go out there. If you, at the end of the day, and then Chris, that's exactly the calculus I used to determine a recap, right? Oh, if this fails, I'll just go get another VP of sales job and make, even more money. Right. So like I was thankfully in a privileged position to do that. But I think also too, it's, if you are a seller, I would focus on, especially in this economy, separating yourself from the competition, right? Standing out, focusing on the buyer experience, collaborating and guiding the buyers in any way that you can. That would be my number one takeaway. I think we're coming up on time, guys. Real quick, 10 seconds each. How does everyone find you? How do we get a hold of everybody?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect. I love talking with other entrepreneurs too, especially if you have a sales background. Like, shoot me a note on LinkedIn or email me. It's Chris, KRIS @sendoso.com.
Awesome. Yeah, same here. Active on LinkedIn. If you're in the New York area, we do meetups. We had one yesterday in the Flatiron area. You can email me, justin@paceapp.com, or check us out on our website.
Awesome. Yeah, we actually sent some of our a team to go. Apparently a great event. So Justin will have to grab a beer in the city. I'm also active on LinkedIn. If anyone has any questions about starting a business or sales tech in general, more than happy to help. Just Mark Firstane, and it's mark@recapped.io.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much. This was an awesome way to start our third day of the summit. Thank you, Mark, Chris, and Justin, for your time today. And for the audience, this session was recorded, so you're going to receive the recording in your email later today. I also dropped all their LinkedIns in the chat for you to access and connect with them. I'm going to drop their emails in the follow-up email that I'm going to send to you, so you can connect with those awesome leaders. And make sure to stick around because we have a lot of panels today. And next up, we have Global Scale Sales Leadership at Pre-Public Scale. That's going to be an awesome panel too. Guys, we can go hang out backstage while our audience enjoys a little break before our next session. So let's go backstage. Bye.